So right now we're going to be talking about the second author I have chosen, which is Mark Twain, who he is considered to be if Honoré de Balzac was the first pioneer for the realist movement in general, Mark Twain was the first pioneer for the realist movement in the US. So he was mostly known for writing stories of boyhood adventures. His stories, many of the times, depicted or provided us with an insight to what his life was like, as not only did he write about the surroundings, or his surroundings specifically, in concerning the society he was around, he also wrote about his own life. He would include little snippets of his own life in his books. Two of the most relevant books that can come to mind when we think of this idea is Life in Mississippi and The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. He also had an incredible talent for reproducing to the T vernacular speech patterns and vocabulary. So what we know is that vernacular language or vernacular vocabulary would be vocabulary that is proper or is only spoken in a regional area. So the regional area he would write about was mostly the regional area that would be surrounding him, so it would be surrounding Missouri most of the time. So he was very, very good at reproducing the everyday language that he would be hearing. He was able to put it onto a paper so that us, the readers, could live through it, live with the authentic language that was spoken. Now, he also was credited with the birth of a subgenre within the novel genre called local color, which is also known as regional literature, which is how the name implies. It is literature that belongs or is exclusive to a certain region. So whether it be character, setting, plot, it is exclusive to a certain region that is being written about in the story. Not only did he give birth to that and was very good with vernacular language, but he was also, like I mentioned, he is considered the first pioneer in the US for realism because he was one of the first authors to focus in the middle and lower class in terms of the social status of his characters in his stories. So that was pretty incredible as to what he was, the accomplishments that are given to him in terms of what he contributed to this movement in the US. But before he was known as Mark Twain, he had other several pen names or pseudonyms he went by, all which are fairly long and were very strange. We can find the following pen names which he went by before becoming Mark Twain officially in 1861. So he used to go by W. Epaminondas Adastrius Perkins. That was one pen name. Then he had Thomas Jefferson Snodgrass. Then he had Quintius Curtius Snodgrass. And then he had Josh. Simple Josh. That was, I would say, the simplest and most normal out of his pen names. But he had many other pen names that he went by, but those are the ones we know of. And not only was he known for writing boyhood adventures, but he was also pretty famous within what would be called back then a lecturer, which was in Mark Twain's job description, I guess would say, was that companies would ask him to use their services. In this case, most of the companies were traveling services. So these companies would ask Mark Twain to travel, pick one of their services to travel. For example, in 1865, the Sacramento Union asked Mark Twain to go on a new excursion they had that was to Hawaii and to write about it. So he was in what we would call now somebody who makes reviews about trips. He would be a modern day travel blogger. I guess you could call it. And through these writings that he would make, he got particularly famous with these companies, and more of these companies would ask him and to go on these trips and write about them so that more people would be interested. He was sort of like a very smart marketing technique that they would use, him and his very attractive way of writing, innovative way of writing for the time period it was in the United States. So also, he was, mm, he, his writing was not characterized for being, could call it bitter. It wasn't before. It was very much boyhood adventures. So you cannot imagine a boyhood adventure being something bitter, sad, or angry. But after the death of his wife in 1905, the grief and loss of the woman he loved was too much, I guess, and that sort of made his heart go cold, and that in its effect did something to his writing, and his writing grew what is described as bitter. So it was not fun, humoristic writing. It was serious. It was more serious, more negative emotions within the writing, per se. Towards 1906, he began to dictate his autobiography to a man called Albert B. Payne. So he would recount all his memories that he had, and with the money he got from his autobiography, he bought a house in Redding, Connecticut called Stormfield, which I mentioned earlier was the house he died in. And in that house he proceeded to live with his family, that family he had left, let's say. So some of the iconic Mark Twain literature we can see that thanks to his habit, I guess we could call it, of just spending his time observing and reporting on his surroundings, much of his iconic literary works we could find are very enticing and very detailed. Very, very detailed. Also, we could say that one of his works, because it was so accurate to the time, considering the language, in terms of language is why The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn was banned, it is frequently banned from public schools for the reason of language. So the language within Huckleberry Finn was not one proper for a school setting, and it wasn't, and it couldn't be any other way, because in the time frame that he set this story to be in, it was the very faithful, very accurate reproduction of how they spoke in that time. So it was really nothing to do with him. It was mostly just schools not wanting students to be exposed to said language. Now we go on to his more iconic literary works. We can find The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, published in 1876. Although some sources say 1875, it is unclear which of the both are the accurate dates. Then we have The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, published 1884. We have Life on the Mississippi, published 1883, and The Prince and the Pauper, published 1881. Up to here is where we can end on Mark Twain and his contributions he made to the realism movement inside the United States.